So the Biden administration is taking a number of steps to restrict some of the core missions of immigration and customs enforcement, also known as ICE. And on the heels of that, we have the Immigration Reform Law Institute just conducted an investigation into one of the tools that ICE has been using to great effect over time. And Jason Hopkins is here from IRLI. Jason, tell us, what was this investigation about and what did you find?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened was following the 2018 midterm elections, we had two different sheriffs get elected in North Carolina, Gary McFadden in Mecklenburg and Gerald Baker in Wake. So two high populous counties in North Carolina, which itself is a swing district state, as they say. So it's high battleground. It's kind of an experiment to see, how elections have consequences and what kind of changes take place. So anyways, both of these sheriffs were elected on the pledge to end their 287G programs in their respective counties, right? And just a quick little background as far as like what 287G is, and I know it's something we've talked about before here. It's an agreement between a locality and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, where it basically deputies to do federal immigration enforcement, right? They can go in when they have individuals in their custody. They can ask them immigration-related questions, and they can communicate with ICE and help with the transfer to ICE if need be. So it's named after an immigration section of the law, 287G, anti-borders organizations, anti-borders advocates who want to top of that. These two sheriffs, there's a good case study on what happened in these two counties in the backdrop of ending 287G. So they were both elected December 2018, or November rather, 2018, and both came into power in December 2018 and immediately ended their 287Gs. So what we did over at IRLI was looked in to see, okay, after the change, after the 287 agreement ended, how many of these aliens were being transferred over to ICE post 287G after the program ended. And to, kind of confirming what we had suspected, there was a substantial drop in these criminal aliens who were being transferred over. For example, and every county measures how they transfer these aliens a little bit differently. In Mecklenburg, for example, they don't go necessarily by transfers, but how many I-203 forms that they're receiving from ICE. In fiscal year 2019, 142 203 forms were sent to their office by ICE. What's the significance of this? Well, it was the lowest number that they had ever seen from ICE since almost the program had begun. The lowest number since then was a fiscal year 2007. And to give you another reference point, the fiscal year just prior to that, fiscal year 2018, there were 537 I-203 forms that were sent. So you're seeing a huge drop. And what does this mean? It means fewer criminal aliens are being taken out of the community and transferred over to ICE, which a lot of these individuals are eventually just released back into the community after they post bail or whatnot. And if you thought that was a major change, well, in Wake County, it was even more substantial. There were 1,556 ICE transfers in Wake County in fiscal year 2018. In fiscal year 2019, now with no more 287G, 2 individuals were transferred over to ICE. So clearly, I mean, this is more than just a correlation. I mean, we're seeing direct causation here from the end of 287G. And so these are criminal aliens who won't be put into ICE custody, eventually deported. They would ultimately be released back into the community. What are the other consequences for this? Well, we also looked into the crime statistics in these two counties. And from 2018 to 2019, in both counties, we saw a rise in violent crime. So we're talking murders, rapes, aggravated assaults, all of these, rise in violent crime in both Wake and Mecklenburg. And that's all open source too, right there. North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation is right there to see that. Now, why are we looking at 2018 and 2019, not necessarily 2020? We want to make this as unbiased as possible. And in fact, 2020 was a crazy year, as everyone knows. Everyone was in quarantine, and a huge major spike in crime. So, I mean, I can only assume that crime has only gotten worse in these areas, like it has in almost every part of the country. So, just to try to keep all the elements the same, we just kept this to 2018 and 2019, 1 year where they had 27G and 1 year where they did not, and before all the craziness of COVID. So, we're seeing a direct result of what's going on, why crime is rising. Now, why should viewers care about what's going on in these two North Carolina counties? Because again, this is something we've talked about before. We've hit 287G, but we're now seeing an active push by numerous Democrats, more than 24 House Democrats, that are looking to defund the 287G program across the entire United States. There's a call on the House Appropriations Committee right now to defund this program entirely. So, I mean, we just examined a case study right here, what happened in 2 counties at the same time they ended, and what happened there. And this could potentially happen to the entire country right now. Democrats do control the House. They sort of barely control the Senate, and they control the White House. So this is a real possibility that could happen, and this could be a situation that comes to your doorstep.
Mm-hmm. Now, those are some pretty damning statistics you've uncovered there. Critics with an anti-borders agenda may look at that and say, well, you can't draw a direct line there because there could be lots of mitigating factors as to why crime went up. Is there anything you could see based on what you reviewed that could explain that rise in crime other than the fact that they abandoned the 287G agreements?
There are, of course, numerous factors that go into a rise in crime. And again, we were talking about now just with COVID and everything, and a huge spike in crime. Who knows what kind of DAs are there allowing criminals to remain. So I submit that there could be numerous reasons. Correlation doesn't always equal causation, but I think anyone would be hard pressed to make the argument that keeping criminals, in this case criminal aliens, in the community would help the issue of crime. That's a very hard argument to make, and I'd certainly reject that.
Now, what would you say to the argument, because the advocates of sanctuary policies and ending these kind of agreements will say things like, well, if we end these things or we embrace the sanctuary policies, this will allow the immigrant community to feel more included in the community at large, and they will be less hesitant to report crimes to the police or cooperate with police. What is the answer to that?
That is an argument made almost universally by the anti-borders and the left that opposes any sort of enforcement on immigration. Their argument is, well, we need to just create a complete line between local law enforcement and ICE. But the problem with that argument is it's assuming that every single individual in this country is aware of cooperation agreements between their local law enforcement and ICE. I'd ask any viewer on this video right here, did you know about 287G before watching this? How many individuals, if you go on and ask in a poll who understands 287G, who even knew about it? So does the average criminal on the street think to themselves, well, they stopped 287G, now I can do whatever I want? I'm really hard pressed to believe that individuals know that. And then the other question would, of course, be, I mean, is a community member, as a member of the immigrant community, going to say, well, I wasn't going to talk to police, but now that they've ended 287G, I will. The average person does not know what this is. The average person does not know the nuance between their local law enforcement and their cooperation with ICE. So I really think that's a hollow argument, and I would love to see more evidence that ending these programs actually helps cooperation, because that's actually something that's very hard to quantify. And I believe these people who push this argument know that. And so it's an argument they can make without really verifying or proving it.
Right. There's also something that we've written about extensively at IRLI.org. There's a visa called a U visa that people here illegally can apply for, that's specifically designed for people here illegally who cooperate with police investigations. So not only are they not deporting people because they're reporting crimes, they are actually protecting those people who cooperate with the police. So when these politicians try to scare these immigrant populations and say, you're going to get deported if you work with police, that's just not true. It's not factually true. In fact, the federal government has done the exact opposite of that to protect those people in those circumstances. So another thing, Jason, about this is that based on what you were saying about those two sheriffs who ran for office in one office in North Carolina, it really seems like the nature of the sheriff is being turned on its head in this country, because for as long as anyone can remember, a sheriff was considered someone who's very law and order, very much about protecting the community. And yet you have people like these two current sheriffs in North Carolina, and there's more of them around the country, who seem to be running on a platform against 287G, something that is demonstrably proven to make the community safer. What is going on with these sheriffs? I mean, it's one thing to have a mayor candidate run on this position, but to have a sheriff proposing these kind of things. What is going on with sheriffs in general in this country that they're supporting these kind of things?
Right, and it's a concerning situation that we're seeing. Sheriff's offices, just like almost every other facet of American life, has become more and more politicized. For so long, ICE cooperation was not controversial, but now we're seeing, especially with the backdrop of the Trump administration, this is largely a rebuke of the Trump administration. I mean, these two individuals, they were elected in 2018, mid-year of the Trump administration. This is largely a pushback against his prioritization of immigration. And we're seeing that in these local elections, they're being forced to deal and argue with this issue. In both of these elections, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, dumped in thousands and thousands of dollars in advertisement to get them elected, largely because of their support of ending 287G. So we're seeing where sheriff's offices, they're becoming politicized, they're being forced to reckon these issues that really kind of go against law and order. And we're seeing more and more activism and more activist input into these races. And so unfortunately, I only think this is going to become a larger and larger issue as it becomes more politicized and more left-wing interest money is being dumped into these races.
And, it's one thing to say, well, the ACLU dumped a lot of money into the race, as they often do. You've got outside anti-borders activists helping these candidates. But at the end of the day, the citizens of that community have to vote for them. Is it that the immigrant communities of these cities are so large that these positions are embraced, or is it something else? I mean, how can these people get elected on a position that, as your evidence shows, makes the communities less safe?
Right. I don't believe it's because the immigrant community has grown so large and that they just completely rejected these sort of things. I think this is a narrative that's being pushed, and largely they're being successful at pushing this narrative that immigrants in America oppose immigration enforcement and don't like the idea of criminally illegal aliens being apprehended. This is not true, and we've actually seen where Donald Trump, the president who's been most closely associated with tough on immigration enforcement, actually for a Republican won the largest swath of the Latino vote in modern history. So that was proven to be not true. But what you have happened is the average voter is not aware of what 287G isn't aware of the nuances of immigration policy. And if you're just an average voter and you hear on the radio and it's just the radio is being dumped in the airwaves of just anti-287G rhetoric, you don't kind of understand what's going on. It'd be easy to just be swayed. And so it's really up to voters to become knowledgeable about this issue and understand why it's important for your local law enforcement to cooperate with federal immigration authorities.
Now, you mentioned that there's movement on Capitol Hill to defund the 287G program altogether. It seems like there's no shortage of congressmen and women who are railing against this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would maybe be the most prominent. Is there anyone pushing back in the opposite direction on this? Is there anyone, they tend to be Republicans, but anyone who is defending these programs and fighting this move to defund it?
It was a relief to hear Tay Johnson, who's currently serving as the ICE interim director, and this is under the Biden administration, come out and defend cooperation between local law enforcement and ICE. And he said that it's vital to have this cooperation, and it's important to keep communities safe. So even has someone who's kind of rubber stamped a lot of the Biden administration's anti-borders policies. That was refreshing to hear Johnson say that. I don't know where he stands politically, really, but and unfortunately, he's not going to be in this position for long, presumably, because the Biden administration has nominated now Harris County, Texas Sheriff Ed Gonzalez to lead ICE. Now, why is this related? He's sheriff of his county, and he ended 287G, and he largely parroted the same talking points that we just debunked here. So once Johnson is replaced by Gonzalez, I can only assume this sort of issue is only going to become more eminent.
Right. Now, take what those organizations were mission-wise in the Trump years. It had to have been a very abrupt shift when the Biden administration came in, because we went from a very pro-enforcement posture with Trump to this really radically opposite thing under Biden. You mentioned Johnson. There's been reports of memos they've circulated internally where they're not going to use the term illegal alien anymore, things of that nature. What must this shift be doing to the culture of these organizations? Because you're taking what are essentially the core missions of these agencies, removal of criminal aliens, and basically telling them we're not doing that anymore, or we're doing it to a drastically lesser extent. What is this doing to the culture of this agency?
Well, as we're having this conversation, the Washington Post just reported that ICE carried out fewer than 3,000 deportations last month. So we're talking less than 3,000 deportations in April. This is the lowest number ever seen in the agency's history. That's what we're talking about right now. That's how low things have gotten. The Biden administration has essentially figured out that you can basically abolish ICE without actually abolishing ICE on paper. They've cut down, they've made it almost impossible for ICE agents to do their job. Someone basically has to be a terrorist or someone charged with or found guilty of murder before they're even allowed to be put on ICE's radar. And even then, ICE agents need a prior approval from their managers to go out and carry out an apprehension, completely tying their hands behind their back. So basically, you've abolished ICE without actually abolishing ICE. I mean, honestly, for them, I mean, it's just a huge policy win. Why even go through Congress when you're just able to do it this way administratively? So they've tied ICE agents' hands behind their back, and we're just seeing basically no work by the agency. This is a nationwide agency that's tasked with enforcing the country's immigration laws, and there's so much bureaucracy and red tape put in by the Biden administration, they can't even do their job.
Unbelievable. Now, if you want to check out more details of this investigation, all the details are available at IRLI.org. That's the website for the Immigration Reform Law Institute. You can also check out other content from IRLI on their Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, Parler, and LinkedIn platforms. Jason, thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.